Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video we're going to be looking at this album by the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, Apocalypse, which came out in 1974. And of course anyone who knows the history of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra will know that this was the first album by the second version of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. So the original version was formed in 1971, John McLaughlin, Billy Cobham, Jan Hammer, Rick Laird, Jerry Goodman. And this incarnation lasted for about 3 years and made 3 albums at the time, In a Mountain Flame being the first, followed by Birds of Fire, and then Between Nothingness and Eternity. They also finished another album, which has now been released as the Lost Trident Sessions. And I've been looking in depth at those early albums, those first albums, on this channel. But now we move on to the second version. So what's happened? Well, you know, when we were looking at Between Nothingness and Eternity on the last video, I started to describe the cracks that were appearing in the band at that time. They were sort of fracturing. We can go into more depth about what that fracturing was about. You know, I think some of it was the fact that there was 5 very strong musical voices that had worked together brilliantly, but all wanted to bring their own input in, and so you started to get a fight for control of the writing, and also I think the other members, bar John McLaughlin, would turn around to John and saying, well, we're really involved in the writing process of the songs that had come out, and I think a row emerged there. But I feel as well that John McLaughlin had a quest with the band, and it was to put across a message bigger than music, to put across a spiritual message. And I don't think the other members of the band were into that idea so much. I think especially Jerry Goodman and Jan Hammer, I think were opposed to that and didn't want to be involved in that, and that created tension. Looking into the history of it, it's quite apparent John McLaughlin is at least meeting with other musicians. You know, the story of how he meets Narada Michael Walden and Ralph Armstrong, you know, that Narada had gone to a MAHAVISHNU Orchestra gig and he'd seen the band, and then John had gone over to his house. So there's an obvious thing that was going on, that John McLaughlin was perhaps interested in pulling musicians that were associated with Sri Chinmoy and that sort of spiritual quest. Although what's interesting is that when he puts the new band together, the new band hasn't all got Sri Chinmoy devotees in. And I've recently read Colin Harper's book on the second MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, and it becomes apparent that there's the same tensions there because of that. So what is this second band, and how is it perceived? Well, it's the big divider amongst MAHAVISHNU Orchestra fans. There's some people that you know, only rate the first band. They don't even, you know, count the second band as being the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. There's that feeling that you sometimes get. It's not the proper MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. It's something else. And there's a feeling that John McLaughlin maybe sells out a little bit on the second albums. These, you know, I've read so much about this over the years, that I do get the feeling that the second MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is seen as inferior, but not by me. Now, my argument for this is this. I think In a Mountain Flame is an incredible statement, a bold statement, the first proper jazz rock album. This is how we're going to do jazz rock. You know, influences everybody. And then they come out with Birds of Fire, and as I've argued here, Birds of Fire is like an upgrade. It's an advancement on those ideas in terms of sound and breadth and vocabulary. It goes up a gear. Between Nothingness and Eternity is an incredible album, but it's brought down a little bit in that those ideas haven't advanced. At that time, John McLaughlin wanted to use an orchestra on that album, the Lost Trident Sessions. I think his intention was to go even further out than what had happened before. So I think once the original MAHAVISHNU Orchestra finished, John's intention was to go further forward, to make an advancement. And I think part of the problem with the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is the second version is not the first version. And if you're looking for that, you are not going to get it from this band. Now, in terms of the actual band itself, right, I think that they did an incredible job of bringing in musicians for that band. It's no way a diminishment. So behind me, I've put up here two absolute classic jazz rock fusion albums, essential albums. One's by Narada Michael Walden and one's by John LePonte. Of course, Narada was brought in as the drums on the second MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, and John LePonte came in on violin. Anyone who knows their history knows that these are both incredible players. Billy Cobb's an incredible drummer, and he's one of my favourite drummers on the planet. But my favourite drummer of all time is Narada Michael Walden. And I think Narada Michael Walden brings in something else, which he then goes on to prove in terms of his writing and production skills. This guy had so much going on, you know, and I think that was so important to the second MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. So in the drum department, Narada's different to Cobham, but no less. He's an equal. John LePonte, of course, was perhaps the greatest jazz violinist on the planet at that time, right? So there's no diminishment there. Ralph Armstrong, I think that they brought in on bass, is one of the greatest fusion bass players of the 70s. I think I've argued this on the Jaco Pastorius video. I think, you know, basses like him and Doug Rauch were equal to Jaco Pastorius. You know, at the time, Ralph Armstrong is playing fretless bass and pushing the boundaries on that bass. So that band's absolutely incredible. But he also brings in Gail Moran on vocals and keyboards. Now, Gail Moran is not a player like Jan Hammer, but I think what John's doing, he's bringing into this second band more feminine energy, if that makes sense. And I think that's one of the things the band possesses. The first MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is very macho. It's very masculine. It's all about it's playing as fast and as loud and as hard. It's all about that, and I think John McLaughlin's trying to temper that, and I think that's something you hear. So if you're going to approach these albums, you need to approach them thinking this is not like the first MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, and John McLaughlin's made aesthetic decisions and he's trying to advance on what he's done before. So what do we get on this album? Because this is the first album that comes out. Well, to me, on paper, this is a huge advancement. This, in terms of jazz rock fusion, is an absolute epic. This is where he's taken the form developed by the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra and he's pushed it as far forward as he possibly can. So what you have here is that basic band of him, Ralph Armstrong, John LePonte, Narada Michael Walden, Gail Moran, and then he's augmented that with a string quartet. Now, it must be said that because of contractual reasons, that string quartet is not on this album. So what you're hearing here is that rhythm section, you know, the basic, you know, the basic band paired against the London Symphony Orchestra, right? Conducted by Michael Tilson Thomas, arranged by the incredible Mike Gibbs, who is the sort of Gil Evans of jazz fusion, you know, and produced by George Martin. Anyone who doubts this album needs to go and check out George Martin's, you know, autobiography, because after the Beatles, he cited this as being the greatest project he ever worked on, and I think it is, and here's why. Here we have the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra and that concept fusing with a real orchestra, and it's the London Symphony Orchestra, right? Now, at the time, you know, because of progressive rock, bands were trying to do that. You know, Deep Purple famously did it and didn't come off well. You know, Pink Floyd on Atom Heart Mother tried to do it and didn't really integrate the band that much with the orchestra. So people are trying to use an orchestra at that time, but they don't really know how to do it. John McLaughlin here is still up against the sort of dynamics and volume of the band against a string section, which, you know, until you had sort of digital recording and different studio design, was really difficult to achieve. He's up against that. But I think at the time, this is possibly the greatest unification between an orchestra and a band. This is leading the way in terms of that approach, I think. What do we get on this album? We get sections that are purely orchestral. We get sections that are orchestral and smidgens of the band, and then you get the band full out. We also, for the first time, get vocals on this, on a MAHAVISHNU Orchestra album. And it's really interesting, you know, when you listen to this album, the first track, which is Power of Love, is basically orchestral track, you know, very romantic in its scope, you know, pulling on influences from like Ravel, Debussy. It's that type of sound. It's pure orchestral. Some of the instrumentalists are in there, right, but it's pretty much orchestral. And that sets the tone. Then we move on to Vision is a Naked Sword. I'm not going to go through all the tracks, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of what's going on. Vision is a Naked Sword starts off orchestral, and then I believe at the beginning of that track we hear a real unification between band and orchestra. And it takes that vibe of Dancer Maya and it like expands it out to such a huge panoramic, you know, point. It's an incredible piece of writing for band and orchestra. And this is the first time you hear Narada Michael Walden, and this has got to be possibly the greatest introduction to any drummer on any album. So Narada's 19 years old when he makes this, and this is the first time you hear him. And how does he come in? With a full-on drum solo. It's like, here I am, Narada. And it's an incredible moment. And so often I feel that drum solos don't work, you know, in studio albums. You know, they're often like, what's going on here? And it doesn't quite work. But in the context of this composition, it just works so well, you know, in basically introducing him and in introducing everybody else. And then they kick into the solos, you know, we start to hear the new way of improvising. And it's different, you know, John McLaughlin's guitar tone has changed. You know, alongside him he's got Jean-Luc Ponty, who is more than his equal. He's an incredible soloist who is bringing so much into this band. Ralph Armstrong on bass, and the empathy between Ralph and Narada is incredible, and it's funkier. Now I've argued that the original MAHAVISHNU Orchestra was really funky, and I think this something doesn't get mentioned, that the roots of Headhunters, you know, and Weather Report are in the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. You know, think of a track like Miles Beyond. It's really funky. You know, so they had a funky sound. But the second MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is also funkier. And I think that John McLaughlin is actively searching to go down that route. Now that's interesting because so many bands that try and, you know, marry themselves up with an orchestra are coming from the more rock prog end. And you'd think you'd need to go more over to the progressive rock side. But actually this band's funkier. So I think there's some really groundbreaking and innovative stuff on here, despite what the critics say, and I'm going to get into why I think the critics knocked this album. We then end side one with Smile of the Beyond. Now this is famous in that it's orchestra and vocal, and then it goes into a big jam. But the orchestra vocal section is famous that Gail Moran was singing it, and George Martin says, we'll do a run and see how it goes. And I think she was chewing gum at the time. I might be wrong, but she either was chewing gum and put it out. Well, she actually has got the chewing gum in her mouth. And she sung it down, sung it very relaxed. And then they listened back and George Martin said, no, that's the one. And Gail was quite upset, you know, so I really wanted to have another go, you know, really nail it. He went, nope, this is the one. And it's one of those brilliant production choices because her vocal is absolutely sublime. And I think she's got an operatic voice, but hearing it in the context of that, with George Martin pulling something else out of her voice, something casual, it's a really incredible moment. Now, if we take Smile of the Beyond, right, there is nothing like that in the MAHAVISHNU canon. And so listen to that, it's a brilliant piece of music. You know, George Martin mentioned this in his autobiography as one of the highlights of his career. So that's a track on here. There's a track on here that with all those incredible Beatles recordings, George Martin, you know, denotes as being a highlight of his career. So are we really going to deny the power of this? Or are we just not liking it because it's not the first MAHAVISHNU Orchestra? And I think that's the deal with this. I'm going to be arguing on this video and the next video, and even the one after that, was we look at the Mark II albums, that this was equal and in some ways beyond what the original MAHAVISHNU Orchestra and done. And I'm sure people are going to find that hard to swallow. And this is really why I wanted to do this sequence of videos and go into the albums one by one. Because when I did my MAHAVISHNU Orchestra ranking video last year, and that's done, you know, that's brought a lot of fans to this channel, I think. I think it's brought a lot of MAHAVISHNU Orchestra fans here, you know, watching what I'm saying. Well, you know, I put the Inner Mountain Flame in at 3. I put Visions of the Emerald Beyond in at number 2, and I put Birds of Fire in at number 1. But if I was honest with myself, Visions of the Emerald Beyond would be number 1. It is my favourite album of all time. And I actually think, as I will argue on the next video, that what's on here, this blending of the orchestra with a jazz fusion band, is really taken to the peak on Visions of the Emerald Beyond. But here, we hear it in Embryo, but we also hear it done incredibly well. And I think there's certain moments on here which rank as being some of the finest moments of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, and I definitely think some of the guitar playing here is some of the best moments of John McLaughlin in the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. So, why did it get such a kick in? Well, I think what happened was, it's basically the music critics growing tired of the genre. So I think, you know, throughout the 60s, jazz rock is pretty much getting ignored by the critics. They don't really get it. I think Miles's move to fusion is confusing. They don't like it. They don't know whether jazz musicians playing with a rock beat is selling out. Right? That's the argument you always get. That's the criticism early on with jazz rock and fusion, is that all the musicians are selling out. They're trying to sell records. Well, I've argued elsewhere that, you know, jazz, like every other genre, is a genre that's trying to sell records. And when we mention the sort of most legendary and influential albums in jazz, like Kind of Blue or Love Supreme, those albums have sold millions, and we forget that the reason why we're just discussing them is because they sold millions. Same thing with the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. The reason why we're discussing the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is because this is a jazz rock band that sold millions, that made the Billboard top 10 and made top 10s around the world. All right? And the critics, for all them thinking that they are leading this, they're not. It's the musicians that are leading this. It's the musicians that are pioneering what is going on. Right? And so once those advances have been made by Tony and Williams' lifetime and Gary Burton and Miles Davis, they're pioneering something which then pays off. And then with the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, it paid off. Here was a band that sold millions and sold out big gigs, and they were a great big success, right? I think by 1974, the critics are always distrustful of any band that is intellectually or musically beyond them, right? They will always want to champion the Stooges and the Ramones and the Clash, right? Because they feel that they can say something about that. But when confronted with a musical genius like John McLaughlin, they don't know what to say, and it makes them feel inferior. And so they will always go, in the end, for that form. I think that happened with progressive rock. It's happened with jazz. I think it's happened with jazz fusion. And so by 1974... I think the critics were gunning for this style of music. It felt passé. They'd heard it all before, you know. And with the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, you were always going to get that accusation that there was no actual musicality there, that it's just, you know, all about virtuosity and playing as fast, and it's emotionless. If you read the reviews, contemporary reviews of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra around this time, that starts to crop up over and over again. 45 years later, we're here talking about it, and I think everybody who is watching this channel is watching it because of the incredible emotional response that we have had to this band. That's why we're here. This is a visceral, emotional response that changes your life, okay? The question is, do we get that from this? Well, I think we do, but I think it's different. It's different to the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. So that's my take on Apocalypse. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be next looking at visions of the Emerald Beyond as we go through the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra catalogue. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see some more, please like and subscribe, and most importantly, put what you think in the comments, because I love to have a discussion. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon.